Howdy. I invite you to enjoy your favorite smoke and your favorite drink, and we'll be right back with Pony's Transmission. Hi there. Welcome to Pony's Transmission. I'm old, I'm trans, get off my lawn. Well, it's week 6, if my math is correct, of my HRT. And in addition to the other changes I've mentioned so far, dreaming and hot flashes, my nipples are bigger. I just noticed it the other day. Oh my God, I'm getting big nipples. Not the areolas. They're still the size of like an atom. But my nips, the part that sticks, they're going boing, and they're getting fat. And they hurt when you touch them a little. And I looked in the mirror today, and I actually saw a little tiny dome of fat underneath just part of the areola. You're going to get big boobs. So, that's what's happened so far on HRT. And now, Pony Show and Tell. You can get off now. You can get off now. Okay. Okay. That was fun. This t-shirt that I'm wearing is a souvenir that I got at the Brick Tavern in Roslyn, Washington. The Brick is known as the oldest operating tavern in Washington State, and more importantly, it was made famous in the television show Northern Exposure. Well, for today's episode, we're going to talk about signs and triggers. Signs that I was trans and things that triggered me into realizing I was trans. And it goes back. The first sign, apparently, I'm told, was that my uncle, when I was 3, said that I ran like a girl. Okay. The next sign, and even I can recognize it, was when I was about 5 and 6. I remember enjoying playing house with the neighbor kids. The other kids wanted to play ball or sports, wasn't interested, liked playing house. In fact, I've wanted to have a dollhouse since I was probably about 7 or 8, and I still do, only my dollhouse would be the Haunted Mansion. I don't want to do that. I had stuffed animals from the time I was a baby. And in fact, I had one that my grandpa gave me. It was about this big. His name was Lion-y. He was a lion. He was threadbare, one eye was gone, and part of the metal armature from the inside was sticking out 1 foot. But I loved that little guy. He was with me for 14 years until, along with all my other stuffed animals, one day my evil stepfather, Carl, rampaged through my room, destroyed everything, and destroyed my animals. And then threatened to force me to go to junior high school and dress in a dress. Because if I was going to be a sissy, he was going to force me to be one. I do still have some stuffed animals now, though. I've reacquired some over the years. And I love my stuffed animals. Well, I got one that's a goose. It's a big Canada goose. He has to honk. And I've got a cute, adorable little skunk with a big, fluffy skunk tail. And I've got a wild and naughty zebra. Another sign was my preferences for certain things. Again, as I say, I was not into sports where everybody else was playing sports and stuff with a ball. I was pursuing intellectual and artistic, experiences. I just had no interest, in sports or that kind of thing. And even when I was young, people called me a sissy and a girl, and bullying was there. And so, there you go. I guess a lot of people saw it in me in ways that I didn't. Pretty early on, I discovered I enjoyed being a bottom. And I loved kissing and making out with boys easily, as not more than girls. I do love girls, still. I had a pretty, when I was a kid, it was in the early mid-1970s, 60s and 70s. I went through puberty in the beginning of the 70s. So by the time I was, coming to conflict with trans feelings, that was about 1974, 75. And I had really pretty strong transphobia up until the age of about 16 or 17, when, again, thanks to my best friend Doug, who by that point his family had moved down to LA. They were managing an apartment building, and there were a number of trans people in there, and some drag queens and stuff like that, and female impersonators, and I got to know these people as people. And that pretty much eliminated any of those feelings pretty quickly. And again, by about 1980 or so, I found myself dating a trans person or two. So yeah, I was able to get through that just by exposure and experience, pretty effectively. Then, as I was, getting into my later teens, 19 and 20, is when I started cross-dressing, and when I first got my hair braided. And I remember the biggest breakthrough that I had was one night when I was about 19 or 20. I was having sex with my boyfriend. He was on top of me, and I finally worked up the guts to say "fuck my pussy" instead of "fuck my ass," because I kept saying "fuck my ass" and it felt wrong. It just didn't feel authentic. "Fuck my pussy" suddenly felt like a world was opening up in front of me. I'll never forget that moment, that breakthrough. And that was when I really finally acknowledged that I am trans. And I used to joke about it to people. I'd say, "I'm trans, I just never did anything about it," which was true. But joking about it minimized it. And I was doing myself a disservice by minimizing it. I also used to joke that I was my neighborhood's crazy cat lady, which is actually true, and I still am. But, so when it was, the egg started really heavily, strongly cracking about 19, 20, 21, somewhere around there. But I didn't want to do anything about it because I was reasonably happy in the presentation that I had. Again, over the years that would change as I realized later into adulthood that I just never really felt like a man. The classic example of a man. Not a person with a penis. I always felt like a dude or a guy, or a person with a dick. That was fine. But the idea of a man in society, that never... It's not that it didn't resonate with me, it's just that I felt I couldn't achieve it. I felt imposter syndrome. Right? And I'm not looking to try to be a girl necessarily either. Honestly, my presentation is probably going to be like a combination of Vasquez, or whatever her name was, from Aliens, and Harley Quinn. A little bit. I'm never going to be a girly girl, like that. I'm going to be a tomboy, And so in more recent years, there have been other triggers. Well, for example, from the time I was about 19 or 20, I knew I wanted a tattoo, and I wanted it to look like this. So, yeah, I knew, and I was willing to acknowledge at that point that I was trans. I started cross-dressing probably about 1980, when I would have been 20, 21, somewhere around there. The first cross-dressing was bikini bottoms, which I could wear as underwear. I remember the first bikini bottom I got was a hand-crocheted string bikini out of Playboy magazine, and I gave the top to a girl I was dating. Cute little black girl named Angie. I don't know whatever happened to her. Anyway, and then that's when I started getting my hair braided, also, when I was, it was 1980 or 81. And I didn't do it extremely often because it cost money, but, as, I got older, I started getting it done more and more often, to the point where now I've had it continuously braided for, I don't know, probably 8 to 10 years now, something like that. Which is why I'm losing up here. I hope I can get some hair treatments going to bring some of that back. But so, yeah, I would do that. And there, again, some of the more recent triggers were a TV show called Transparent, which is, I think, on Netflix. And it's this really interesting show about these high schoolers, some of whom are queer and some of whom are trans, and they're navigating their way through high school at that time. And I think it's England or Canada, I'm not sure which. It's a very good show. And finally, more recently, I remember a couple of days at Disneyland when I had my annual pass just before COVID hit. I started seeing people presenting themselves at the park. The first one that I saw that struck me, I was sitting on a bench over by the Haunted Mansion. I see this guy walking by. This dude looked like a big old bear. Big. No shoulders, just kind of sloped down to big. He was wearing kind of a stained T-shirt, and Bermuda shorts. I don't know if he had flip-flops or I think he had tennis shoes on. And he had short gray hair. But in his hair, he had a red with white polka dots mini bow. for Minnie Mouse. I just love that. And then I remember also seeing a guy coming off of California Screamin' wearing a black leather kilt. He was right in front of me. And then finally, I was having breakfast at the Carnation Cafe on Main Street in the outdoor patio, and suddenly sitting down right across from me, the next table, were these two young guys, probably 18 to 20 at most. And the one was really flamboyant. He was bald and he had glitter on his head, and he had one of those little headbands that went around, and he had eyeliner, he had false eye, he had eye makeup, and he was real cute. And he wasn't dressed in women's clothes, but he was being very, very flamboyant and cute. And so was his friend. And I just remember sitting there kind of both admiring them and feeling a little jealous, wishing I could do that too. And so those have been among some of my, triggers, from young up until, recently. I know it's not truly comprehensive, but, that's been some of it. I'd love to hear what some of your experiences are. Please like this and share and subscribe. There's a subscribe button down there. It would really, really, really help me a lot. And so with that, I think I'm going to try drawing a test of that tattoo on my shoulder. See what happens.
A few moments later.
Huh. I better stop now before I end up with the farm report.